Please pray with me. O Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. So as I mentioned earlier, we're at the end of this Acts, the Work of the People journey, and I just wanted to provide you a brief recap for those of you who maybe haven't been with us through this journey, and a reminder for those of you who have, kind of jog what you did receive, what you did hear. So here's a summary. We are church, never alone, an unusual family. We get that. We're a weird family. All right, I love that. We are for Jesus, life and love. We are on the move for everyone, everywhere. And when God's grace is on the loose in Jesus, through us, then we better plan to be surprised. Yeah. So, we've come to the end of this journey, and Paul is telling his story. He has been on quite a journey himself. If you've been reading along in the book of Acts and all the different places that he's gone and the people that he's seen and preached to, all the different responses that he's gotten as he's endeavored to share the gospel and connect with his audience in very specific kinds of ways, right? And so we can see this story of Paul on a number of different levels. On the one hand, it's a personal story. I mean, this is a guy's life and heart being changed, interrupted by Jesus. On another level, it's like this is the story of how we got to where we are as the Western church. I mean, this is sort of the story of the spread of Christianity beyond the bounds, the story of Jesus beyond the bounds of the Jewish people and to the ends of the earth, even people like us, Gentiles, right? And so where would we be without God intervening in Paul's life? What would we be without like 13 books of the New Testament and a whole lot of the book of Acts, okay? So here Paul is telling his story, and by the way, a bit of context is helpful. Just before this, it says that Paul is on the steps of the Jerusalem temple, and he's standing there in chains. You see, this is the first in a series of trials that Paul is going to undergo, because he's going to have to defend himself for how he's been living and what he's been doing and what he's been telling people, okay? And so he starts, and his story is kind of maybe divided helpfully into three different movements. And so first he starts to talk about Paul the Pharisee, sort of his former way of life, and he builds from a base of connecting with his audience. And again, we talked about this last week, how Paul was attentive to who was listening to him. He knew his audience. I think we do well to follow his lead and take his cues. It won't all turn out sunshine and roses, but we still do well to connect intentionally and personally. So he knows his audience, right? Maybe on this day I should be waving a W flag or donning the Cubs gear or something to connect with this audience. Well, maybe like half of you, I don't know. But Wisconsinites don't care in this equation, right? So, all right. So anyways, so he starts by connecting to his audience, and he makes this appeal like, I am a Jew. I'm one of you, after all. I was trained by Gamaliel, brought up in the fear and instruction of the Lord, and I have just as much zeal as the rest of you. He hits on at least a couple of things, and what makes it even more powerful as Paul begins to speak to this audience that has written him off and is apparently quite noisy, is he starts off by speaking in Aramaic, their language. And all of a sudden this hush comes over the crowd, and they at least wait and hear him out. Yeah. I don't even know if they were going to hear him. But he starts out in Aramaic, and then he talks about his upbringing. Oh, so that builds some common ground. And then he goes further, I share your zeal, okay? I'm one of you. And so he builds from that. And I am so zealous, after all, that I was on a mission to exterminate this movement of the way of Jesus from the face of the earth. I was going to put a halt to that and sabotage it any way that I knew how. That's how dead set against it I was. That's how zealous I was, and how convinced I was that I was right and true. Yeah. Maybe you know some people that are dead set against the value of Jesus or Christianity or the church in general. Maybe you know people in your world or are acquainted with them who are sort of at this place. I think if we recognize that Paul was there, we can recognize and apply this teaching of Jesus that the fields were not ripe for harvest in Paul's life, okay? He wasn't ripe. He wasn't ready for the good news of Jesus at this point when he's a Pharisee dead set against the way. He wasn't ready to receive it. I mean, and that's further underscored by the fact that he listens to Stephen's whole speech, apparently, which goes through the Old Testament scriptures and then leads it up to, and the Messiah came and you rejected him too, huh? And Paul still gave approval to his death. He wasn't ready. And so take heart when you know and can identify the Pauls in your life who are in that place. Because maybe they're just not ready yet. Maybe they're just not there. But let's also identify that even in the midst of that lack of readiness, God was doing stuff in Paul's life that was preparing him for his future work. A Greek citizen, and so he gets sort of this protection over his travel as he goes about and runs into legal issues. He is trained in the way of the Jews. He's trained to know the scriptures in and out, backwards and forward. He knows the customs and the traditions, and he is observant of them. Even though he became a Christian, he's still observing the laws and the customs of Judaism. And so you better believe that God was there using everything. And even though Paul wasn't ready, God was preparing him for his future work. Now maybe you can look at this as on the level of like identifying with Paul. Here's this guy who's a murderer turned missionary. His zeal was there. It was at an appropriate temperature, and yet it was aimed at a target that was dead wrong. And so all God did was redirect that zeal to another place. You see, God's able to redeem the things of our lives where we're aimed at the wrong target, where we're preparing for another path and another plan, and He's able, as an artist, to fold that into His work, His tapestry, the good, the bad, and the ugly, all of it. He's powerful enough to redeem that in your life. And if you wrestle with something in your world where you're going, I don't know if God can forgive me for, you fill in the blank, for this wrong attitude, for this wrong action, for this killer word that was shared with someone, look at Paul. God took a murderer and turned him into a missionary. What greater testament is that? Is there to God's forgiveness and how powerful it is? You're not beyond saving. Don't believe that lie, okay? So, Paul, I imagine, is like the kind of guy, and I'm not necessarily in all cases this kind of guy, but I've encountered these kinds of people in my life where they make very, very exclamatory statements like, I will never do this. Raise your hand if you're one of those people who like says, I will never, and then how many of you have eaten your words many a time, all right? Yeah, okay, yeah. That I always revel in that. When that person gets to eat their words, on the other end of it. You imagine that for Paul, right? I mean, somebody comes up to him and tells him in the midst of this, like, you will be the number one missionary in all the world. You will be the one who will impact the world of Christianity, our world as we know it, more so than anybody else, save for Jesus himself. And he's like, picking up something to throw at you. I mean, no way. Never in a million years. It wasn't his plan, but it was God's. So, Paul continues telling his story. He's built this base of like, I'm one of you, I'm a Jew, and now he talks about, why am I the way I am now? Well, you see, there was this interruption. Jesus messed with me in a major way. When I was on the road to Damascus, I was still breathing out murderous threats and trying to shut down this kingdom movement that I saw going that was a threat to my way of life and my known existence. And Jesus intervened, and he threw me on my back. And a bright light blinded me and stopped me in my tracks for a number of days. Now, in the midst of the story, Paul says he heard a voice. The other traveling companions who were with him didn't hear the voice. I think that's so true of our world, too. As we think about our experiences of faith, sometimes we hear the voice, and other people around us who see and experience virtually the same thing don't receive it the same way, right? And so for Paul, that's true as well. Here it is. He's been changed by this crazy thing, and so this explains why the change. If I'm a good Jew, then why now? Well, Jesus changes absolutely everything. Turn my world upside down. If you want to know why I am the way I am, it's Jesus. If you want to know why I do what I do, it's Jesus. It turns out that my heart will sing no other name. Isn't that a beautiful song lyric? I mean, that's aspirational. That Jesus is our only song. The only name we need to know, really, when we get down to it. How amazing is that? And so Paul the Pharisee becomes Paul the Jesus follower because of an intervention on the road to Damascus. And then God brings somebody into his life to continue to build on that platform to help him interpret his experiences. He brings in Ananias, who, by the way, is a good, reputable Jew, right? He's a God-fearing, respected kind of guy. And he uses words like the God of our fathers, which, by the way, is an extremely traditional kind of way of saying that in Judaism. The God of our fathers is sending you out as a missionary to the Gentiles kind of thing, okay? Yeah. And so Paul's still trying to kind of point to, this is still good traditional Jewish stuff. You may not think so, and it may not look like it to you, but it is. And so the God of our fathers did this. And so he says, what are you waiting for? Like, if God's got this call on your life, what are you sitting around waiting for here? Get baptized, wash your sins clean, be forgiven, and get on your way. And so Paul does. And then Paul, who was the Pharisee, who became the Jesus follower, is now the murderer turned missionary, the former persecutor, now sent to be a grace giver. I mean, how cool is that? Paul couldn't have written that better himself. And in the sending, there's this kind of stark warning. You see, there's this line in there that says, "Leave Jerusalem immediately. The people here will not accept your testimony." And it's sort of written all through this speech. I mean, Paul's in chains appealing to the people and defending himself because he's on trial. And then it talks about, it references this sense of rejection because of. And so it's like the call of Jesus is exactly what saves Paul, and it's also what brings him near to death again and again and again. You see, this is the way of Jesus. This is discipleship, if we're being truthful about it. There is nothing easy or comfortable about following Jesus in this world. nothing easy or comfortable about it. Actually, as we seek to follow Jesus, we will come to know suffering and humiliation and rejection, the likes of which we know nothing about. All right? It's going to happen. Paul started to resemble Jesus. He's there in the midst of the crowd and people aren't buying into him. All right? The same is going to be true in our lives. See, Dietrich Bonhoeffer sums up that the call to Jesus is the call to come and die. There's an aspect of dying to yourself and your own agenda and your own plan and submitting to a new plan. There's an aspect of calling you to come and die in the face of adversity, in the face of threats to your life, in the face of those who would see truth in another way. We see that in our world today. The call to follow Jesus is not easy. And so we're not striving, actually, for a 100% success rate or a 100% approval rating. That might actually be kind of a red flag to say, like, what am I not doing here? Not that we're going out trying to pick a fight or be a jerk, all right? I am not giving you license to go out and be a jerk, okay? Just to be clear on that, right? But when you're telling the truth of Jesus, when you're telling about the way to life in His name, not everybody's going to buy into that. They're going to think you're full of it. And that's kind of how it's going to go. That's how it went for Paul. Okay? So Paul kind of rounds out his speech, and he's talking about how he was on the steps of the temple, and he was praying fervently to the Lord, and he had a vision. Once again, this is a good Jewish thing to do. Like, you're at the temple praying. You're observing these customs. And in the midst of this vision, he says, "Go, I will send you to the Gentiles." And so Paul's actually making the appeal. Because I'm a good Jew, and this stuff happened to me, I'm a Jesus follower who's going out as a missionary. So what about you now? That's kind of the subtext of his speech. Like, what about you, who can relate to me in every other way? Now you're encountering Jesus through me. What about you? And what do they do in response to Paul's best effort? In response to Paul's great speech of defense? Our reading, I mean, Bob, and you captured it, right? Rid the earth of this man, right? Yeah, you nailed it, man, buddy. All right. Rid the earth of this man. He's not fit to live. Wow. Once again, we see clearly that the way of following Jesus is the way to the cross. It's the way to find your life through losing it and this kind of stuff, okay? And so this is Paul telling his story, and we can use that as a way to kind of look at our own story, and we've been doing that so far in this message. And I just want you to consider, what about the detours in your life? What about those interruptions, those unwelcome interventions in your life that kind of change the course of things, maybe in small or maybe significant ways? I think deep within us, our gut response is kind of frustration and anger and disillusionment, like this is not the way things are supposed to go. Now, could Paul's story be looked at in that way? Could Paul's story be looked at as an unwelcome intervention? You see, I've come to see, and I'm continuing to learn, and guys, I'll level with you, like, and God knows, I'm a slow learner. Like, he's telling me stuff, and he's making stuff apparent to me, and I'm slow to pick up on what he's throwing down. Maybe you can relate, but so he continues to keep with it, and he bears with me, and, I love him for this. But the things in our lives that are the unexpected, unplanned things, they're sometimes the best, right? The stuff that we wouldn't choose for ourselves. Like, I mean, I look at my own story and I go, like, I didn't choose to grow up in a Lutheran home and to be baptized very early on and to experience the words of God in song. I mean, that's a grace being poured into me. It wasn't my plan. I didn't plan to become a pastor. That wasn't my vision or dream or plan. I wanted to be an artist. Wasn't my plan. I didn't plan to marry this girl that I knew from grade school, right? That wasn't part of the plan. I didn't plan to go to the seminary and pursue study as a pastor. I didn't plan to stick with it long enough. I thought I would fall back on something else. I didn't plan. The northwest suburbs of Chicago were not a part of my plan. I'll level with you folks. I love the northwest suburbs of Chicago. I am coming to love them. And here's the thing. But it wasn't my plan. I didn't choose this. And it wasn't part of my plan that after a little while of my time here, there would be major staff vacancies and a senior pastor vacancy and this kind of stuff. And I'd be kind of helping hold down the fort of leadership. That wasn't my plan. So what gives? God, I'm not getting what I want. See, what he's teaching me is that, sometimes the stuff you didn't plan for and choose for yourself, sometimes that's the best stuff. That's sometimes the coolest stuff where his grace is working in a most significant way. I hope you can see that in your life as you retrace the steps of your life's journey. And I pray that you can celebrate that and even come to anticipate God's future interruptions on your plans. So here's the thing. As we think about your story and what's going on there, I want to share with you a story of a woman who just got baptized this morning at Crosspoint. Jesus messed with her, interrupted her story.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Grubbs, and this is my baptism story. I had been introduced to multiple faiths growing up, but my parents felt it appropriate to allow my sister and I to make our own decisions and to learn about different faiths and really decide what was best for us individually. But it wasn't until after I was married and my husband and I were considering starting a family, and we started talking about, what we want for our children in terms of faith and religion. And it struck me that why do I want all these wonderful things for my kids, but I haven't made the decision for myself? So I looked up Crosspoint and read about all their wonderful, their mission and their purpose. And I reached out via email, and that was that. Difficult to put into words. It's been both a weight and a weightlessness. A weight because I know that I'm not alone. I feel a presence with me. And weightlessness because I know that I can fly and I can spread my wings, but I'm never going to get too far, and I know that God is always going to keep me in line and keep me safe, and keep an eye on me and make sure that I'm following the right path, and he's always going to guide me back. Learned a lot and experienced the power of prayer, not necessarily answering all those prayers, but really having that conversation and building that relationship with God, and really feeling him in my everyday life and in the choices that I'm making and the interactions that I'm having with other people and in my current relationships. Mostly I'm looking forward to, finally taking that step and, giving myself over to Jesus and to God and really officially starting on that path. And it took me a while to get here, and some of it was just out of fear because I felt like I was a little far behind, and just really hoping that my story will encourage others to learn and just to decide and to welcome God into their lives.
How cool is that? Jesus is still messing with people even today, calling people back to him, writing grace into their story, and thanks be to God. Here's the thing. He did it with St. Paul. He did it with Stephanie. He longs to do it with you and me. Maybe as you reflect on your life story, you don't have that big all-at-once conversion story that's so dramatic like St. Paul, like everything changed in an instant, in a flash of light. But you've got a story to tell. And you've got a story that proclaims God's grace and how he has filled you up with his grace, how he's written grace into your story, how he's forgiven you and kept with you and redeemed the good, the bad, and the ugly of your life for his purposes. Own that. Rock that out and share it with others like life depends on it. Like the Spirit's leading you to do just that. You see, God is messing with people today. The kingdom is on the move, on the loose, and we can see it. And it's working out the mission of God through the people of God, you and me. And when God's grace is on the loose in this way, we should plan to be surprised.